Welcome back to Queens of the Damned, a horror podcast. Today we're honoring some international folklore from Guatemala, Japan, and Italy, and discussing the cultural implications of these stories. Enjoy!
So, my first legend is from Latin America. I'm going to specifically be talking about the Guatemalan version of the legend, though it's also a big legend in El Salvador, and they're pretty close. I mean, there's like some regional differences, but it's pretty close. So, it's called El Cadejo, and it's a phantasmagoric animal which takes the form of a large shaggy dog, but with deer hooves. Yes. So, yeah. Yeah. So, you think it's a dog, and then you look down, and it's not a dog. So, there are two main types of cadejos. The first is the white cadejo. And that one is benevolent. It eats bell-shaped flowers that grow on volcanoes. And its main job is to protect people. It mostly protects people who are sort of vulnerable, like people who are really drunk, or homeless people, or vagabonds, and then people that are just being targeted by any evil spirits or forces, including the other type of cadejo, which is the black cadejo. So the black cadejo is malevolent. It does not eat flowers. It eats newborn babies. Miranda's gonna spit her drink. Sorry.
Wasn't expecting this one.
Sorry. And its very presence can lure you into making like evil or bad decisions.
Oh.
It has glowing purple eyes, and it lurks in graveyards and alleys, basically just waiting for a victim to come by. It has a distinctive smell of urine and sulfur. When it walks, it rattles with a jerking motion.
Oh, God.
Yes. It's
Yeah. So it's kind of like, you know the girl in The Ring, how she like...
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yes. That's exactly what it's like. It's like Samara from The Ring.
No.
And then its gaze freezes anyone who makes eye contact. So you basically can't get away. So there are 3 subtypes of black cadejo. The first is the devil himself, who takes the form of a large wounded black dog that has hooved feet that are bound by red-hot chains. So the devil does not pursue his victims. He merely acts as the eyes of evil. So he's almost like a scout. He just watches you, and if you encounter one, you will befall a horrible tragedy in your life. Whether you die, or a loved one dies a horrible death, or something like that. Usually it's someone else, because of course the devil wants to punish you, and if you're dead, that's not, So the devil form of the black cadejo cannot be stopped by anything, even by the white cadejo. So if you see one, you're fucked. Sorry.
Well, it's the devil, so...
Yeah, I mean, you, can't even
so.
run away, really. Like, once it locks its eyes on you, it's too late.
Yeah.
Even if you don't look at it. So the next type is kind of just like the regular black cadejo. This one kills and savagely rips apart its victims. It scares the victim with, like, weird growls and howls that disorient you. And then when you're weak enough, it leaps on you and eats you. This one can only be saved, or can only be stopped by the white cadejo. You cannot fight it off yourself. So then the final type is the hybrid black cadejo. And this one is the offspring of a normal dog and the regular cadejo. I'm not sure how that happens. They didn't really go into detail. So it can be killed with difficulty by an extremely strong man. Keep in mind that a lot of men in Guatemala, I won't say most, but a lot of men in Guatemala carry machetes.
Oh my God.
For protection. Well, it's a third world country.
What a culture.
I mean, it's a third world country. It's not like necessarily the safest
Oh no,
place.
I'm not judging. I'm kind of...
Oh yeah, no, I know. I'm just saying that to us that sounds really extreme. But there, it wouldn't be.
Yeah.
So if you do manage to kill one of these, it will rot in a matter of seconds and leave a stain of evil where nothing can grow. So it will not bite you, it will not kill you, but if you get close enough to it, it will kick you or attempt to make other kind of physical contact, because any type of physical contact with this type of Cadejo will drive you insane. So they have a phrase that I'm not even going to attempt in Spanish because it's going to be really embarrassing, but it's like he or she was touched by the Cadejo, and they often use that for people who have mental illness. You know, that's kind of what they believe, is that that's what caused it. Especially in the olden times. I mean, not necessarily so much anymore in Guatemala City, but if you were to go out to any of the other villages, they believe it. And a lot of people in Guatemala City still believe it. I mean, I think that's one of the differences between there and here, is that these legends are such a part of their cultural fabric. They're like accepted as fact. So El Cadejo is a recurrent figure in a lot of Guatemalan and Latin American art. I first learned about it from Sergio. He gave me a book for my birthday, the first birthday that I had after we got together. So we'd been together for like 2 months. It's like the only fiction book that he's ever read, because he doesn't read. And it's a short story collection called Leyendas de Guatemala, so Legends of Guatemala. And it's by Guatemala's like most famous author, Miguel Asturias. He's their only Nobel Prize winner. And he has short stories about a lot of these legends, and one of them is El Cadejo. So that's how I first learned about it. I then heard about it again a couple of weeks later when Sergio told me that he has encountered a white Cadejo. When he was young in Guatemala, he made a lot of bad life choices, we'll say, at a young age. And he was like 14, and a friend of his, the father of a friend of his, had died. He and his friend were going to like the main cemetery in Guatemala City, which is where he grew up, which is right on the edge of a cliff. I mean, there are cliffs and volcanoes and mountains all over there. And they were 14. They were very drunk. Probably they had smoked a lot of pot. I can't really remember the details, but they were pretty fucked up. And he said when they got in the graveyard, this white dog came and walked next to him as they were walking to the grave, and it walked on the cliff edge so that his dumb, drunk ass wouldn't fall off the cliff and die. And he said the dog followed him all through the cemetery until he left the cemetery. Wow. And then the dog stayed. The dog just sat down at the entrance of the cemetery.
Wow.
Yeah. So, if you believe it, you believe it. I believe it. I mean, he's had several encounters when he was not intoxicated with supernatural things, especially in Guatemala. So, I absolutely believe stuff like this is real. So that's El Cadejo. It's a big doggy. Sometimes it's a nice doggy. Sometimes it's not a nice doggy. It's probably the only dog that I would say is not a good dog. But yeah, that's El Cadejo. So that's one of the most famous Latin American legends.
That's pretty cool, because isn't there... Nikki, I think you talked about it, the black dog.
I might have talked about seeing
more of a thing here in America, I guess.
Yeah.
You see it like out of the corner of your eye. Yeah.
Look at even in Harry Potter, and Professor Trelawney sees a black dog in Harry's cup, and she says, "Oh, it's death."
European, but then when you're talking about that, the black dog, it seems a little more. I don't know if it's universal or.
Well, but if you think about it, I don't know how long this legend of El Cadejo has been around in Guatemala, and the Europeans came over and colonized it. I mean, the Spanish came over and colonized Guatemala a long time ago. So it could have come over with them. I mean, I really don't know.
Of course.
I mean,
Yeah.
the devil, that would be Catholic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the Mayans wouldn't have a concept.
Yeah, I thought
the
that
same
was very
concept of the
interesting
devil.
when you said
So
that.
to say that it smelled like sulfur and had red hot hooves, and
Yeah.
that's
I'd be
Catholic.
interested to know what it morphed
Yeah,
from.
that's definitely Catholic hellfire and brimstone.
Maybe it was
so.
something before it was Okadeho. Like, when the Catholic influence came in, it kind of melded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It would be interesting to know. I mean, so much Mayan stuff was lost. Obviously, once the Spaniards came in, once the conquistadors came, that, I'm sure that it did meld with something. Because, I mean, if you even look at, like, Dia de los Muertos down there, I mean, they meld their traditional beliefs with Catholicism. I mean, so they sort of practice their own blend of Catholicism, their own version of Catholicism down there. Even in their church services, I mean, they really blend more traditional, colorful, I mean, look at their depictions of the Virgin Mary. I mean, she's always super colorful and with gold and everything. And then you look at the European versions and it's like brown. It's an interesting hybrid, but I agree. I would love to know kind of what Latin America added to this legend that came over from Europe.
I'm kind of curious about the hoof thing too, because do you either of you know where that comes from? Because it seems like the devil always has hooves.
I don't, because I just find that to be really weird that sometimes the devil is pictured as this like hooved beast, and then sometimes he's just pictured as like a dude, because like he was God's most beautiful angel.
What I want to know is why the goat is associated with the devil. I don't know that, but the hooves I think are supposed to be goat or pig, and I feel like I knew that once upon a time, but I don't remember.
Why does the devil
wear Prada, Meryl Streep?
Why does the devil wear Prada? That's a great question. Why does the devil have all the best tunes? What? Oh my god. I mean, he does. Oh god. I don't know if I can read this whole academic article. How the devil got his hooves and horns. This is a long article. It just says that, it says, this paper re-examines the problem of the origins of a popular medieval and modern image of the devil as an anthropomorphic creature with hooves and horns, and seeks to reconstruct the analogous ancient image of a satyr-like devil as it could be witnessed in diverse sources, including Hellenistic mythology, rabbinic legend, and early Christian texts.
That the Catholics appropriated it as the devil. A goat god. Or a satyr goat.
Okay.
Because the god Pan was what? Yeah, well, he wasn't a god, but yeah. And, I mean, he would kind of lead people into, like, temptation. I think I remember that from Greek mythology. He had, like, a constant erection, and they were always, like, having sex or masturbating. I guess. That sounds like, they do say if you have an erection lasting more than 4 hours, you need to contact your physician.
No thanks.
I would too, but it costs $30, so no thanks.
I'm good.
It's not worth it. I'll just do my own research.
That's just interesting, though, because as you were saying that, I was like, God, why does the devil always have hooves in everything? Like,
yeah.
And it's just something that I don't know. It feels like something that you just kind of know. Like, yeah, the devil has hooves, but I don't really know where it came from.
It has to be this. I mean, so much stuff from Christian... identification with Satan. Thank you, Wikipedia. It just says, Pan's goatish image recalls conventional faun-like depictions of Satan. Although Christian use of Plutarch's story is of long-standing, Hutton, whoever that is, has argued that this specific association is modern and derives from Pan's Oh, I don't know. Never mind. So it says that medieval and early modern images of Satan tend to just show generic semi-human monsters with horns, wings, and clawed feet. But in Victorian and Edwardian times, neo-paganism became a big thing, and Pan was like one of the big gods of neo-paganism, and so that's where they think that they got the association.
Thanks, Wikipedia.
How interesting.
Cool.
Grain of salt.
I'm glad I know that now.
Me too. Look at all the fun things we're learning. Thank you, Wikipedia.
Miranda, is it you?
Look at all the things that we're
learning.
Yes.
Go.
Okay. Oh boy.
Teach us things.
I'm gonna do my best. So, I chose God. I'm probably gonna get stuff wrong. Tyler sent me pronunciations, but I'm still probably gonna get it wrong.
Just go with it.
Okay. So the first one I picked was called Ondio, which means a vengeful or wrathful spirit. It's from Japan. Both of mine are from Japan. And these spirits can affect health, they can cause death, or they can cause natural disasters like earthquakes, fires, floods, storms, drought, famine, and pestilence. So they're basically like one of the four horsemen, is what I got from that. So the origin of them is unclear, but they're traced back to the 8th century. And it started with the idea that spirits of the dead can harm the living. And the earliest cult around the Ondio was developed around Prince Nagaya in 729. And then Chronicle of Nihongi in 797 is the first recorded case of possession. And that one affected their health. But the most famous one is the spirit of Oiwa. I'm going to get these so wrong. So this is based on real events from the 17th century Edo, but it's been adapted into a kabuki play and then adapted into like theater and all that kind of stuff. But at the base, the story was that she was married to a samurai named Iomen. She's married to this samurai and she leaves her husband because he's a thief and he's like really terrible guy, and she goes home. But he follows her when she goes back home, and he's stopped by her father, Yotsuya Samon, who demands that he divorce his daughter. But Aimun refuses and murders her father, and then lies to Oiwa and says that a stranger killed her father. So they reconcile, and he promises to avenge her father. So Oiwa then becomes pregnant, and after the birth, she becomes really, really sick, and she's bedridden. And because of that, Aimun becomes resentful of her. And it just so happens that their next door neighbor is like this really, really wealthy physician, and he has this really cute girl for his daughter, whatever. And he falls in love with this girl, basically, who lives next door. And her father conspires to help her win over Aimun, and he gives Oiwa an ointment, which is, he says, is supposed to help her in her ailments, but it actually poisons her and disfigures her face. He does that because then Aimun then hates her, and her father then convinces him to divorce. This is so hard to do when I can't pronounce the names.
No, it's okay. I'm following it.
Oh my god. It's like every word is a struggle. Okay, so because her face is disfigured, Aimun then hates her, and the father then convinces him to divorce her and marry his daughter. And then he insists that their money would then be inherited by him if he decided to marry her. So Aimun pawns Oiwa's items to pay for the wedding, and then he pays his friend to rape her so that he has a legitimate reason to divorce her by accusing her of infidelity. So when
Love it.
Yep. So the friend comes over in the middle of the night, but then he is horrified by her face because it's so disfigured and refuses to rape her. He then explains to her what Aimun's plan was. And she was completely unaware of the fact that her face was disfigured. And so he gives her a mirror, and she sees herself, and she basically goes insane. Starts touching her hair, and it starts coming out in clumps and stuff like that. And so she punctures her throat with a sword. So while she's bleeding out on the floor, she curses Ayemon's name until her last breath. Her body is then discovered by his servant, and when he found out, he was thrilled. He was super excited. But before the servant could even question why he was excited, Ayemon murdered him and then nailed his body and Oiwa's bodies to a door, and then he threw them into the river. And then he spread lies that the two of them had been sleeping together, so then he was free to remarry. So on their wedding night, Ayemon struggled with sleeping. He rolled over to see Oiwa, and in his fear, he grabbed his sword and slashed at her. But once the illusion faded, he realized he had killed his new bride. And then he runs out of the room to get his stepfather's help, and the ghost of his servant appears at the door. When he slashes at that ghost, he realizes he kills his stepfather. So everywhere Ayemon goes, he sees Oiwa's Ondio. And to escape her, basically, he flees into the mountains, hoping that being alone will get him away from her, but she still follows him and haunts him. So now that he is alone and just in the middle of nowhere with just her Ondio, he slowly goes mad because he's incapable of separating nightmare from reality. So that's Japan's most famous story of an Ondio. But they're basically just like this really vengeful, wrathful spirit that can kill you or just basically ruin your life in general if they have to.
Interesting. This sounds so familiar. I was just looking up because I feel like I've seen a movie.
Is it usually a woman?
About this, but now I can't find one that I've found. So
I know there are a lot of vengeful Japanese women ghosts.
Yeah.
Oh, it says, well, while I was trying to look that up, it says that Sadako, who's Samara, in the Japanese version of The Ring, is an homage to Oiwa.
Oh, that's cool.
It says her final appearance is a direct adaptation of Oiwa,
that makes
including
sense
the
now.
cascading hair and
the
drooping
face.
malformed eye.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
That does. I didn't know that. I was just... Like, it sounds so familiar. I was trying to see if I've seen a movie based on it, but I don't think I have. That was such a good one. I love Japanese ghost stories.
They're so cool.
They're so fucking cool. They're so
usually
detailed.
The freakiest for some reason.
Or actually, not just
no,
Japan,
maybe
but any
it's
of
because
East
they're
Asia.
so detailed.
They are. And because they, like, think of everything. There's, like, no plot holes. Well, and I feel like so many of them are based on, like, a specific story.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they come up with a story around it. It's not just, oh, here's something that people see sometimes. Like, no, there's, like, a plot behind it.
Yeah.
They're, like, fully formed characters. I love that.
Yeah. It's super cool.
That was a good pick, Miranda. I never heard that before. Like I said, it sounded kind of familiar,
it sounds familiar
but
to me, too. Maybe
I can't
I've read
think
it.
of anywhere where I've seen it, so...
Yeah, well...
You know, I find that a lot of Japanese legends are about, like, wronged women.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's why it sounds so familiar. I mean, you rarely hear a story about a male ghost. Even fictional ones like The Ring or, like, Dark Water.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's always a female ghost.
It just, like, this is super off topic and we can edit this out, but, like, sometimes it really annoys me that there are so many stories about vengeful, wrathful women. Because, like, the culture knows that women are being fucked over, but nobody wants to do anything about it. I don't know.
But, like, back then, I mean, they had no power in life, so their only power was in death.
It just drives me insane sometimes.
Like, there's a couple of really good Japanese horror movies from, like, the 60s. One's called Kuroneko, and it's this woman who's, like, raped and murdered. And, of course, she has no power to fight back in life, but then she comes back as a ghost and she fucks that guy's shit up. So it's almost like, you know, the men are getting what's coming to them in the end, you know?
Yeah.
Like the women really can't fight back, but they're gonna still get them in the end.
Yeah.
So maybe that's how they kind of dealt with that sort of thing.
Maybe. It just kind of bothers me sometimes. Especially because, like, these things are... A lot of these stories are so old. Like, this one, like, dated back to the 8th century.
Mm-hmm.
So people... Yeah. Anyways. sometimes stuff like that just bothers me, where, like, you're clearly writing about how women are getting fucked over. Anyways.
Well, but I mean, you have, even back in, like, Greek mythology, you have, like, Medea.
Yeah.
Who gets totally fucked over by Jason.
Yeah.
But she sets his bride on fire, so
I don't want to
she
talk.
wins. Okay, Nikki, what do you have to teach us
So I was that
today?
annoying kid that, like, got a prompt and went, but what if I did this instead? I chose Italy for my country. And I wrote all of this down because I knew I wasn't going to be able to articulate it. So here we go. So Italian culture can be kind of weird when it comes to the occult. My grandmother is from Italy, and I'm only a quarter Italian, but I was raised around all their weird superstitions. So I am definitely aware of the often contradictory approaches to the occult that Italians have. I really think we can blame Catholicism for this. Again, Catholicism. This is like the third time in a row, like since last episode we said, oh, it's Catholicism's fault. Anyway, but Roman Catholicism is steeped in pagan traditions and ritual and superstition. But when I asked my grandmother if she knew any good ghost stories from her region, she smiled very close-mouthedly and said, we're not supposed to believe in that stuff. As just like so she told me that she never paid attention, but that ghost stories and urban legends were told quite often by our family. And in the same breath, she reminded me of the story where the three sisters and she and both of my great aunts once had rocks thrown at them at a seemingly inhuman speed when they were little in Italy. And when they looked up, they say they saw the ghost of their grandmother standing on top of the hill. She was not a nice lady when she was alive, so I guess it's not that hard to imagine she'd be throwing rocks at them in death. I'm not sure. But anyway, so this is it. Like, we don't talk about it, but if the mood is just right, grandma or great-grandma will tell you about her prophetic dreams or remind you never to bring her chrysanthemums because they are the flower of the dead. So, yes, in Italy, they are considered the flower of the dead. So you never, you made that mistake once.
Oh, yeah.
And pretty much all this is to say that superstition and mortality and morality feature heavily in the stories. And the stories surrounding the ghosts are often more interesting than the apparitions themselves, which is why I kind of took a left turn here. And this one is like a true murder with a ghost footnote. So my first one's the very sad story of Beatrice Cenci. And if you've read a Keats poem or a Shelley poem or a Byron poem, it's basically that. But it was real. So Beatrice was what you would call a golden girl. She was the daughter of a nobleman in the 16th century, known for her beauty and character. The story is basically the tune of most of the famous ghost stories in Italy, where you have this golden girl who is wronged, and her ghost comes back for vengeance. Here we go again. Maybe it's not just Japan. Anyway, Beatrice was from... I'm gonna murder this too. La Petrella del Salto in the foothills of the Abruzzi Mountains, about 100 miles or a 2-hour drive from where my great-grandmother was born in Chieti. On 9th of September 1598, a woman named Plautilla Calvetti was combing flax in her house when she heard people outside shouting, "They are screaming in the castle." So this place is pretty much what you'd expect. It's like a tiny village with a large castle called La Rocca. I'm just gonna go for it. I don't know. It means rocks, guys. Looming over it on the hill. And in the castle lives Beatrice with her father, Count Francesco Cenci, and his second wife, Lucrezia. And their life is basically a Gothic short story, meaning that the Count was known as morally corrupt and the women were supposedly prisoners in the castle where they were subject to his craziness and most probably, sexual abuse. As he was really hated all throughout the village, but no one could really do anything about it. So when this woman, Plautilla, who was a housekeeper at the castle, heard the shouting, she knew that something was really the matter. And she knew all about the Count, and I would guess was also probably subject to his abuse if she worked around him. So she's like, oh God, what the fuck's he done now? So she ran up to the castle with one slipper on, where she saw Beatrice, who was rather stoic about the whole thing and didn't say a word, even when prompted. But the screaming that the villagers heard and that Platilla could also hear came from Lucrezia, the wife. At this time, some men came up the path and stated that the Count was dead. He'd apparently fallen from the balcony of the castle onto the rocks below, about 43 feet, which is like, that's a high fall, but it's not like what I imagine when I think he fell from the castle to the rocks. Anyway, but he was dead. They collected the body and they began to prepare it, and this was when people started wondering how this had happened. The Count had 3 noticeable wounds on his head, one about 3 to 4 inches long. The man was hated so much that one of the women thrust her finger into the largest wound by his right eye and pretty much cursed his name. Yeah. Like, the wound was so big it, like, went into his eye socket, you know, so she was just, like, rummaging around in there. Gross, huh? He totally deserved it, though. Anyway, some of the onlookers, however, picked up that these wounds could not have been caused by the fall, but with a sharp instrument like a hatchet or a stiletto knife. Eventually, they found out that 2 men had stolen into the Count's room while he slept and driven an iron spike into his head with a hammer. It took him 3 tries. That's why he had 3 wounds. Then they tossed him off the balcony to kind of make it look like a fall. One of these men happened to be the Castellano, Platilla's husband, who was also Beatrice's lover. It turns out that Beatrice, Lucrezia, and Beatrice's brother had hired them as hitmen. Beatrice would not confess even under torture. So after a year, she's like, fuck no. After a year, both were beheaded on the Pont Sant'Angelo, the bridge of, I think it's like the Bridge of Saints, not the Bridge of Saints. I don't know. My grandmother would be so mad at me right now. A bridge near the Vatican. People stated that while Beatrice was valorous on the block, her stepmother was not. So Beatrice has become something of a legend. The Romantics loved her for obvious reasons, like her story has everything, as well as like sticking it to the man. She had the beauty, the tragedy, the dead is an innocent woman thing going for her. Shelley wrote about her, of course, and I think a lot of people who know anything about Romanticism know him as the guy who had sex with Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley on her mother's grave. Like, not judging, just not surprised. So there's even an oral tradition that states that she stabbed her father through the ear with a silver pin, which is much more delicate than what actually happened. Because people, I don't know, wanted to kind of preserve her chastity in death. So the ghost part, finally. Every year on the anniversary of her death, Beatrice is said to walk across the bridge carrying her severed head. Her demeanor is said to be sad but elegant. And this legend likely arose due to the people's sense of injustice at her execution. Like, she didn't get a happy ending, so everyone's like, well, you know, she's just going to be here forever. Just saying, I told you so. And it's probably still alive today because during the French Revolution, her grave and a bunch of others with her was desecrated by French soldiers. And a witness said that a soldier even tossed her skull around like a ball. So clearly the injustice didn't end after she was dead either. And that's the story of Beatrice Cenci. I hadn't either.
Cool.
Very interesting. I've never heard that one before. Yeah, wow. So, why did the sympathy only extend to her? As far as I can tell, her mother was like,
I don't know. Beatrice was like the ideal of womanhood to people and youth and beauty. And her stepmother was kind of the stepmother. Okay. Right? She was the second wife to this guy. She was carrying on. And then when she was getting executed, she didn't take it gracefully. And she was like begging for her life. And so, like, but this is all, it's kind of gone into legend now, so I don't know what the purpose is of setting up, like, the stepmother against Beatrice, but I don't know.
Right. Yeah. That's definitely interesting because...
Oh, I'm sure she was.
You know, obviously, I mean, I assume that the stepmother was also horribly mistreated.
And there's a good example of...
So she was just as much of a victim.
Contradictory values There's some feminism in that story, but there's also some sexism and misogyny.
Mm-hmm.
And they, like, kind of mesh together in this weird way.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and that definitely, I mean, it plays to, like, a larger point that we've talked about before, and I know we're going to talk about in future episodes, but, like, the perfect victim, you know, how, like, they focus on the beautiful, the cute white girl who's missing, and then, you know, maybe, like, a girl who's not so cute, or a girl who's not white
like,
gets no
Beatrice was
attention,
set
comparatively
up as
speaking.
the perfect woman. I don't know.
Right, the perfect victim, someone who is totally innocent, who is taken advantage of and abused, and interesting.
You know,
well, that
it's
would
crazy
definitely be
because I
weird
was
to look
looking at
up
all
and see
these
some
stories,
woman
and it
walking
was
past you
either
carrying her own
woman
head.
carrying her own head or evil monk. That was it, you know. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, woman carrying her own head is like that's a whole subgenre of ghost stories. Like, I'm pretty sure that... Sorry, my headphone popped out. I'm pretty sure that, like, one of the tower ghosts is seeing Anne Boleyn carrying her own head.
I think there's several locations Anne Boleyn is seen.
I'm pretty sure she carries her own head.
But there's only a couple
where
she's seen carrying her own head.
Yeah, she's definitely seen in the tower. Yeah, she's definitely seen in the tower. And I don't know about Catherine Howard. I don't know if she's ever seen carrying her own head around. But it's definitely an interesting trope. I wonder why that is.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter at QOTD Podcast, on Facebook at facebook.com/QOTD Podcast, Tumblr at queensofthedamnpodcast.tumblr.com, and YouTube at Queens of the Damn Podcast.
Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and TuneIn Radio. You can also follow us on our blog, queensofthedamnpodcast.wordpress.com, to find bonus content and extra information on our episodes.
If you would like to donate to our show, you can find us at patreon.com/QOTD podcast, where you can receive special perks as a listener for becoming a monthly patron. If you would like to make a one-time donation, you can send it to QOTDpodcast@gmail.com on PayPal. We'll see you next week.